Marriage with an unhealed, fearful avoidant doesn't begin with chaos. It begins with intensity. It begins with a connection that feels almost cosmic, like you've finally found someone who sees into the deepest parts of you. The chemistry is undeniable. The conversations are raw, vulnerable, and electrifying. They tell you things they've never told anyone. They look at you like you're the safest place in the world, and in those early days, you believe you are building something rare, something profound. But here's what no one tells you. That intensity isn't always security. Sometimes it's fear attaching itself to love. Sometimes it's two nervous systems colliding in a way that feels like destiny, but is actually unresolved trauma seeking relief. And if you're married to someone who carries unhealed, fearful avoidance, that early magic slowly transforms into something confusing, something painful, something that leaves you questioning your own reality. In the beginning, the honeymoon phase feels overwhelming in the best way possible. They fall fast, they open up quickly, they talk about forever sooner than you expected. It feels like passion, devotion, deep emotional bonding. You think, finally someone who loves as deeply as I do. But beneath that intensity is a nervous system that doesn't know how to regulate safety. They are attaching quickly because they fear losing you. They are diving deep because abandonment terrifies them, and the closer they feel, the more panic quietly builds inside them. One moment, they are planning your future together. The next, you feel a subtle shift. A slight withdrawal, a hesitation in their voice. It's small at first, barely noticeable. You brush it off. Everyone has moods, right? But over time, that shift becomes a pattern. Emotional closeness is followed by distance. Warmth is followed by coldness. Deep connection is followed by silence. And this is where confusion begins to live inside the marriage. You wake up some days to the version of them that is affectionate, attentive, emotionally present. They hold you close, they reassure you, they make you feel chosen. And then, without warning, something changes. Maybe it's a small disagreement, maybe it's nothing at all. But suddenly, they're distant, quiet, hard to reach. You feel like you're standing outside a locked door, wondering what you did wrong. You replay conversations in your head. You analyze your tone, you question your needs, because when someone pulls away after intimacy, your instinct is to fix it, to restore the closeness, to make them feel safe again. But the painful truth is this: their distance isn't always about you. It's about the fear that intimacy triggers inside them. Unhealed, fearful avoidance lives in contradiction. They crave love deeply, they long for connection, but when it arrives, it feels overwhelming. It feels unsafe. Closeness activates the fear of being engulfed, controlled, or eventually abandoned. So they pull back, not because they don't love you, but because their nervous system equates intimacy with danger. And you, as their spouse, feel that push and pull in your bones. One week, your marriage feels solid. The next, it feels fragile. You never know which version of your partner you're coming home to. And that unpredictability slowly chips away at your sense of security. You start walking on eggshells without even realizing it. You monitor your tone. You choose your words carefully. You avoid bringing up certain topics because you've learned that conflict doesn't just stay conflict. It explodes or it disappears into silence. Conflict in a marriage with an unhealed, fearful avoidant doesn't feel like teamwork. It feels like emotional warfare. Small disagreements can escalate into something far bigger than the issue itself. If you express hurt, they may hear rejection. If you ask for reassurance, they may hear criticism. If you try to talk through a problem, they may shut down completely. Sometimes they explode. Their anger feels disproportionate, sharp, defensive. It's not just about the dishes or the missed call. It's about the old wound underneath, the one that says, "I'm not safe, I'm not enough, I'm about to be left." Other times they do the opposite. They disappear emotionally. They withdraw into silence. They become unreachable. You sit in the same room with someone you love, but it feels like they've left the building entirely. And that silence can hurt more than shouting. Because when someone shuts down instead of resolving conflict, you're left alone with the tension. There's no repair, no reassurance, no closure, just distance. You start to feel like you're begging for basic communication. You feel needy for wanting resolution. You feel dramatic for wanting consistency, and slowly you begin to shrink parts of yourself to maintain peace. But here's another heartbreaking layer. They crave reassurance deeply. They might ask you if you still love them. They might question whether you're happy. They might test your loyalty in subtle ways. And when you reassure them, when you pour your heart out and promise that you're not going anywhere, it seems to calm them for a moment. And then they push it away. They might say you're just saying that. They might doubt your words. They might suddenly create emotional distance after you've just reassured them. It feels like trying to fill a cup with a hole at the bottom. No matter how much love you pour in, it never seems to stay. This cycle becomes exhausting. You give reassurance. They doubt it. You give more. They withdraw. You try harder. They pull back further. And somewhere along the way, you start wondering if you're losing yourself in the process. Marriage with an unhealed, fearful avoidant can feel like loving someone who is constantly bracing for impact. Even during peaceful moments, there's a tension underneath, as if they're waiting for something to go wrong. And sometimes, when things are calm for too long, they unconsciously create conflict just to relieve that tension. Because chaos feels familiar, stability feels foreign, and you, the spouse who simply wants consistency, find yourself caught in the emotional storm. You don't just love them. You try to understand them. You research attachment. You excuse behaviors because you see their pain. You tell yourself they've been through a lot. And that compassion is beautiful. But compassion without boundaries becomes self-abandonment. You start doubting your own reactions. Maybe you are too sensitive. Maybe you expect too much. Maybe marriage is just hard. But deep down, your body knows when something feels unsafe, when love feels unpredictable, when intimacy feels conditional. The hardest part is this: they do love you. In their own way, they love you deeply. But love filtered through unhealed fear doesn't always feel safe. It feels unstable. It feels like walking toward someone with open arms, only to have them step back just as you reach them. If you're watching this and you feel seen right now, if you recognize the emotional roller coaster, the hot and cold patterns, the silent treatments after vulnerability, I want you to know something important. You are not crazy for wanting consistency. You are not needy for wanting repair. You are not dramatic for wanting emotional safety in your marriage. Marriage was never meant to feel like a battlefield where you're constantly proving your loyalty. It wasn't meant to feel like a guessing game where you're decoding moods and bracing for withdrawal. Loving someone with unhealed, fearful avoidance requires immense patience. But it should not require you to erase yourself. It should not require you to tolerate emotional instability as the norm. And it definitely should not require you to sacrifice your own mental health just to keep the peace. When emotional closeness is followed by sudden distance, when conflict feels explosive or unresolved, when reassurance is requested but never received, when you feel like you're walking on eggshells in your own home, these are not small things. These patterns shape the emotional climate of your entire marriage. And the truth is, without healing, those patterns don't disappear on their own. They repeat, they deepen, they create cycles that become harder to break with time. If this feels like your story, take a breath. You're not alone in this experience. Many spouses sit quietly in marriages like this, loving deeply while feeling profoundly lonely. But awareness is powerful. Understanding the pattern is the first step toward clarity. Because you deserve a marriage where closeness doesn't trigger fear, where conflict leads to repair, not withdrawal, where reassurance builds trust instead of suspicion, where love feels steady, not conditional. And in the next sections, we're going to go even deeper into what this dynamic truly looks like and what it does to your heart over time. And as this pattern continues, something else begins to surface in the marriage: trust issues that never fully go away, even if you have never betrayed them, even if you've shown up consistently, even if you've proven your loyalty 100 different ways. There's still this undercurrent of suspicion. It might not always be obvious. Sometimes it shows up as subtle questioning. Who were you texting? Why did you take so long? Are you sure that's all? It might be said casually, even jokingly, but underneath the tone is anxiety, a fear that something is about to be taken away. Other times, it's projection. They assume motives that don't exist. They interpret neutral situations as threats. If you're tired, they assume you're pulling away. If you're quiet, they assume you're upset. If you're upset, they assume you're planning to leave. And the painful part? No amount of reassurance seems to fully settle it, because the mistrust didn't start with you. It started long before you entered their life. It's rooted in old betrayals, childhood wounds, broken attachments that taught them love is unstable. So even when you are safe, their nervous system stays alert. You feel like you're constantly proving something, proving your faithfulness, proving your intentions, proving your love. And over time, that pressure becomes heavy, because trust is supposed to be mutual and growing, not something you have to earn daily like a test you never signed up for. Then there's physical intimacy, and this is where the emotional chaos often mirrors itself in the body. There are moments of deep passion, intense closeness, nights where it feels like all the walls have come down, and you're completely connected. In those moments, you feel chosen, desired, bonded. But just like emotional intimacy, physical intimacy can trigger fear. After a deeply connected moment, they may become distant the next day, less affectionate, less engaged. It's as if the closeness was too much, as if their system needs space to recover from feeling exposed. You might notice that after arguments, affection disappears completely, touch feels withheld, intimacy becomes conditional, or sometimes it's used to repair without actually resolving the emotional issue underneath. You reconnect physically, but the conversation never happens. The wound never gets addressed, so the cycle continues. And that inconsistency can be deeply confusing, because intimacy is supposed to build safety. But in this dynamic, it sometimes becomes another push-pull loop. You crave consistency, but instead you get waves, closeness, distance, reconnection, withdrawal. Eventually, something even more subtle begins to happen. Apologies become complicated. When conflict occurs and they hurt you, you may notice how difficult it is for them to fully take accountability. You might get partial apologies, "I'm sorry, but you also," or "I didn't mean to," "You're just too sensitive." There's always a layer of defensiveness wrapped around the apology. It's not always malicious. Often it's shame. Deep, overwhelming shame. To fully admit wrongdoing feels like confirming their worst fear, that they are flawed, broken, unlovable. So instead of sitting in responsibility, they deflect, they explain, they minimize, they shift the focus. And you're left feeling unheard, because an apology without full accountability doesn't bring repair. It doesn't soothe the wound. It leaves you holding pain that never truly gets acknowledged. Over time, you begin to doubt yourself. You question your reactions. You wonder if you're exaggerating. You tell yourself maybe you're expecting too much. When you bring up an issue and it gets flipped back on you, you start analyzing your tone instead of the behavior. This is where the erosion begins. Not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly. You become smaller in your own marriage. You filter your emotions. You hesitate before speaking. You rehearse conversations in your head before having them. You don't want another blow-up. You don't want another shutdown. So you adapt. And adaptation, when it's one-sided, becomes self-abandonment. There may even be moments where their version of events makes you question your memory. That's not what happened. You're overthinking it. You always take things the wrong way. At first, you brush it off. But when it becomes consistent, it destabilizes you. You find yourself thinking, maybe it is me. Maybe I am too emotional. Maybe I'm the problem. And that thought hurts, because you entered this marriage wanting partnership, not confusion. You wanted safety, not instability. You wanted love that felt grounding, not love that feels like walking on shifting sand. Then comes the silence. Silence in a marriage like this is not peaceful. It's heavy. It's loaded. When conflict happens and they withdraw instead of engaging, the house feels different. The air feels thick. You can feel the distance even if they're sitting right next to you. Days can go by without real conversation. You might try to break the tension, but their responses are short, flat, detached. It feels like punishment, even if they don't label it that way. You go to bed without resolution. You wake up without clarity. And the loneliness hits hardest in those quiet moments, because you are technically not alone. You are married, but emotionally you feel abandoned. And here's what makes it even more painful. When things are good, they can be really good. When they're present, they can be loving, attentive, even protective. Those moments give you hope. They remind you why you fell in love. But hope mixed with inconsistency creates attachment. It keeps you holding on, waiting for the good version to return, believing that if you just love them the right way, things will stabilize. Then something else begins to show up, subtle self-sabotage. When the marriage feels calm for too long, when stability settles in, there may be an unconscious shift. They pick a fight over something minor. They become distant before an important milestone. They question the relationship when everything seems fine. It's confusing because from your perspective, nothing is wrong. But for someone with unhealed, fearful avoidance, peace can feel unfamiliar, and unfamiliar can feel unsafe. So chaos becomes a strange comfort. Conflict feels predictable, instability feels known, and without realizing it, they recreate the emotional environment they grew up in, because it's what their system recognizes. You might notice this especially during big moments, anniversaries, major decisions, times when commitment feels even more permanent. Instead of leaning in, they lean out. Instead of celebrating closeness, they create distance. And you're left asking yourself, why now? The truth is, deeper commitment can amplify deeper fear. The more permanent the bond feels, the louder their internal alarms become, not because they don't care, but because caring feels risky. If you're listening to this and recognizing your own marriage, I want you to pause for a moment and check in with yourself. How often do you feel at ease? How often do you feel secure without having to earn it? How often do you feel emotionally safe enough to be fully yourself? Because love should not feel like constant uncertainty, marriage should not feel like emotional survival mode. Yes, every relationship has struggles. Yes, every couple faces conflict, but there is a difference between normal challenges and chronic instability. There is a difference between occasional misunderstandings and a pattern of fear-driven push and pull. When trust is fragile, intimacy is inconsistent, apologies are incomplete, silence becomes punishment, and self-sabotage disrupts peace. These are not isolated incidents. They are signs of unhealed attachment wounds operating inside the marriage. And the hardest truth, you cannot heal someone who is not ready to face their fear. You can support, you can encourage growth, you can model stability, but you cannot regulate their nervous system for them forever. At some point, you have to ask yourself whether the marriage is nurturing you or draining you, whether you are growing together or simply managing chaos, whether your compassion is empowering both of you or quietly costing you your own peace. You deserve to feel chosen consistently, not just when they're afraid of losing you. You deserve repair after conflict, not silence. You deserve trust without interrogation. You deserve intimacy without withdrawal. Marriage with an unhealed, fearful avoidant can feel like loving someone who is fighting an invisible battle every day, but it can also feel like being collateral damage in that battle. And awareness is not about blame, it's about clarity. It's about understanding the pattern so you can decide what you're willing to accept and what you're no longer willing to tolerate. Because love, no matter how deep, should not require you to live in emotional confusion. In the next sections, we're going to explore what this dynamic does to your identity over time, how roles begin to shift in unhealthy ways, and what true healing would actually require, not just from them, but from both of you. In the next phase of this marriage, something subtle but deeply transformative begins to happen to you, not just to the relationship, but to your identity inside it. Without even realizing it, you start becoming the stabilizer, the emotional regulator, the one who keeps things from falling apart. You become hyper-aware of their moods. You learn the tone that signals distance. You recognize the silence that means they're spiraling internally. You anticipate reactions before they happen. And slowly, your role shifts. You stop being just a spouse. You become the therapist, the mediator, the emotional anchor. When they're overwhelmed, you soothe them. When they're insecure, you reassure them. When they're triggered, you absorb the reaction. You explain their behavior to friends. You justify their withdrawal. You defend them because you understand the trauma underneath. And compassion is beautiful, But when compassion turns into constant caretaking, something inside you begins to drain. You may notice you're exhausted in ways you can't explain. Not physically, emotionally. You're tired of being strong, tired of holding space, tired of regulating two nervous systems instead of one. You begin to feel responsible for their healing, responsible for their stability, responsible for their happiness, and if they spiral, if they withdraw, if they lash out, you automatically ask yourself what you could have done differently. This is where emotional burnout creeps in, quietly, because you are giving so much patience, understanding, reassurance, empathy, but you're not always receiving the same consistency back, and over time, that imbalance creates resentment. You might not say it out loud, you might even feel guilty for feeling it, but it's there, that whisper inside that says, "Who is taking care of me?" Then there's another layer that becomes impossible to ignore. Their past never truly leaves the room. Childhood wounds show up in adult arguments. Old betrayals echo in present conversations. Parental dynamics replay in subtle ways. If they had a distant caregiver, they may unconsciously distance from you. If they had a volatile environment, they may recreate volatility when things feel too calm. It's not intentional, it's pattern, it's survival wiring. But knowing that doesn't always make it easier, because you're not arguing with their past, you're living with it. You might notice that in moments where you express healthy needs, they react as if you're attacking them. When you ask for closeness, they hear control. When you ask for clarity, they hear criticism. When you ask for reassurance, they hear pressure. And that distortion is exhausting. You feel like you're speaking one language, and they're translating it into threat. You try softer tones, you try different words, you try giving space, you try leaning in. Nothing seems to consistently land. And this is where loneliness deepens. Because the person you married is right there, but the emotional connection feels blocked by invisible walls. You can sense their love, but you can also sense their fear standing guard around it. They love you, but they don't know how to feel safe inside that love. And love without safety feels unstable. You may begin noticing something else that shakes you. Subtle breakup language during moments of stress. Maybe we're just too different. Maybe you'd be happier with someone else. I don't know if I'm good at relationships. At first you brush it off as frustration, but when it repeats, it plants seeds of insecurity. Divorce threats don't always come as ultimatums. Sometimes they come as hints, as fantasies of escape, as conversations about what if. And every time those words surface, something inside you tightens, because stability requires emotional permanence, and when permanence feels questioned, your sense of safety cracks. You might start fearing the next argument, not because of the conflict itself, but because of the possibility that they'll threaten to leave. And here's the heartbreaking irony. Often those threats aren't about wanting to leave, they're about fear. Fear of being left first, fear of failing, fear of not being enough, so they mentally exit before they can be emotionally abandoned. But even if it's fear-driven, it still hurts you. The push-pull dynamic becomes the heartbeat of the marriage. When you move closer, they step back. When you pull away to protect yourself, they panic and move toward you. It's like a dance, neither of you consciously choreographed, but you both know the steps. You chase reassurance, they retreat. You detach for peace, they pursue. And this back and forth becomes addictive in a strange way. The highs feel euphoric because they come after lows. Reconnection feels powerful because it follows distance, but emotional stability shouldn't depend on contrast. Love shouldn't feel like surviving storms just to appreciate sunlight. Over time, your nervous system adapts to the chaos. You become hypervigilant. You anticipate shifts. Even during calm moments, part of you waits for the other shoe to drop. And that state of constant alertness is not peace, it's survival. Then something transformative begins to happen. You start changing. Maybe you get tired of chasing, maybe you begin therapy, maybe you start focusing on your own healing, maybe you learn about boundaries. And as you grow more secure, something interesting happens. The dynamic shifts. When you stop over-explaining, they feel the difference. When you stop chasing during distance, they notice. When you hold boundaries calmly, instead of reacting emotionally, it disrupts the pattern. And sometimes that disruption triggers anxiety in them because the old dance isn't working anymore. They may test you, they may escalate temporarily, they may accuse you of being distant now, but what's really happening is this: you're stepping out of the role of regulator. You're refusing to carry both emotional loads, and that forces them to confront their own. This is the crossroads. Because healing in a marriage like this requires more than love. It requires self-awareness, accountability, willingness to face discomfort. True healing would look like them acknowledging their fear instead of projecting it. It would look like staying present during conflict instead of withdrawing. It would look like offering full apologies without defensiveness. It would look like seeking help instead of expecting you to fix it. Healing would mean learning to sit with closeness without panicking, learning to trust without interrogating, learning that stability is not danger, and that kind of growth is possible, but only if they are willing. You cannot force someone to confront their wounds. You cannot love fear out of someone who refuses to see it. You cannot sacrifice yourself into creating security for both people. At some point, the hard truth surfaces. Love is powerful, but love alone is not enough to sustain a marriage without emotional safety. You can adore someone deeply and still feel unsafe in the dynamic. You can understand their trauma and still be harmed by their patterns. You can empathize with their fear and still require accountability. And choosing peace does not make you selfish. If you've been holding this marriage together with patience and hope, hear this clearly: you deserve reciprocity. You deserve effort. You deserve growth from both sides. Marriage should feel like partnership, not emotional parenthood. It should feel like stability, not unpredictability. It should feel like home, not a battlefield. If healing is happening, if they are actively working on themselves, learning, showing accountability, then there is space for rebuilding, there is space for transformation. But if the patterns continue unchanged, if fear continues to dictate the dynamic, then you are allowed to ask yourself difficult questions. Is this sustainable? Is this nurturing me? Am I staying out of love or out of hope that they'll become someone they haven't chosen to become yet? These questions are not about blame, they're about clarity. Because staying in a cycle of push and pull for years can slowly erode your self-worth. It can normalize instability. It can convince you that chaos is just what marriage feels like. It's not. Healthy love feels steady. It feels safe. It feels like disagreements lead to repair. It feels like closeness builds trust instead of triggering fear. And if you've been surviving in a marriage with an unhealed, fearful avoidant, I want you to recognize your strength, your patience, your empathy, your resilience. But I also want you to recognize your value. You are not here to be someone's emotional training ground. You are not here to absorb wounds that aren't yours. You are not here to prove your worth every day. You are here to experience partnership. And whether that partnership transforms through mutual healing or whether you eventually choose peace over chaos, the most important thing is this: you do not lose yourself in the process. Because at the end of the day, marriage should feel like two healed adults walking side by side, not one person constantly chasing safety while the other runs from it. And if this message feels like it's speaking directly to your heart, take that as confirmation. Your experience is real, your pain is valid, and your desire for emotional security is not too much. In the next part, we'll go even deeper into what long-term exposure to this dynamic does to your nervous system, your confidence, and your future, and how to begin reclaiming your emotional stability, whether they choose to heal or not. In the next part, we have to talk about something most people avoid: what this dynamic does to your nervous system over time. When you live inside unpredictability long enough, your body adapts to it. At first, the anxiety only shows up during arguments. Your heart races, your chest tightens, you replay conversations in your head, but eventually that heightened state becomes baseline. You begin scanning for shifts automatically. You notice tone changes instantly. You feel distance before it's even spoken. You can sense when something is off within seconds. That isn't intuition alone, that's hypervigilance. And hypervigilance is exhausting. It means your body rarely fully relaxes. Even during calm periods, there's a subtle readiness, a preparation for the next emotional swing. You may find it hard to sleep after conflict, hard to concentrate during the day, hard to feel fully present because part of you is always monitoring the emotional climate at home. Over time, this affects your confidence. You used to speak freely, now you calculate. You used to express needs openly, now you soften them. You used to trust your reactions, now you question them. Living in push-pull cycles can make you doubt your own stability. You might think, why am I so anxious lately? Without realizing your body has been adapting to unpredictability for years. And this is the silent cost of loving someone who hasn't healed their fear. You slowly start carrying it in your own nervous system. Then something else begins to shift. Your sense of identity. You may not recognize yourself the way you used to. Before the marriage, maybe you were light-hearted, grounded, confident. Now you feel more serious, more guarded, more tired. It's not because you're weak, it's because you've been in survival mode. When emotional safety is inconsistent, your energy goes toward maintaining stability. Instead of expanding your life, you stop dreaming as boldly. You hesitate before making independent plans. You prioritize preventing conflict over pursuing joy. And the scariest part, you might start thinking this is normal. You might tell yourself, this is just what long-term relationships feel like. But deep down, there's a quiet ache that says it shouldn't feel this heavy. There's also grief. Grief for the version of the marriage you hoped for. Grief for the consistency you imagined. Grief for the emotional ease you crave but rarely experience. And grief can coexist with love. That's what makes it so confusing. You can deeply care about someone and still mourn what the relationship isn't giving you. At some point, the question shifts from, how do I fix this, to what is this costing me? Because chronic instability doesn't just create tension, it shapes your future. If nothing changes, if the patterns remain the same for 5 more years, 10 more years, how will you feel? More secure or more depleted? This is where the hard truth becomes unavoidable. Healing requires participation from both partners. You cannot single-handedly create secure attachment in a marriage. You can model it, you can embody it, you can encourage it, but you cannot force someone to face fear they are committed to avoiding. And here's what true healing would actually look like in real life, not just in theory. It would look like them recognizing their triggers without blaming you. It would look like them staying in conversations even when they feel uncomfortable. It would look like consistent effort, not temporary change after a near breakdown. It would look like therapy, self-reflection, accountability. Healing is not saying, that's just how I am. Healing is saying, I see the pattern, and I refuse to let it keep hurting us. And healing also involves you. It involves you recognizing where you may have overfunctioned, where you may have tolerated too much, where you may have abandoned your own needs to maintain connection. Because sometimes the anxious side of the push-pull cycle keeps you hooked. The hope, the highs, the reconnection after distance, that emotional roller coaster can feel intoxicating, even when it's painful. Breaking that cycle requires courage. It requires sitting with discomfort instead of chasing reassurance. It requires allowing silence without overcompensating. It requires setting boundaries calmly and holding them even when they test you. And boundaries are not threats, they are clarity. They sound like, I need conversations to end with resolution, not silence. I won't accept being blamed for expressing my feelings. I want consistency, and I'm willing to work toward it, but not alone. If your partner responds to boundaries with growth, that's a sign of possibility. If they respond with escalation, blame, or withdrawal, that's information too. Because at the end of the day, the hard truth returns again. Love is not enough. Love does not regulate trauma automatically. Love does not erase childhood wounds. Love does not replace accountability. Marriage thrives on emotional safety, and emotional safety is built through consistent behavior over time. You deserve to wake up without wondering which version of your partner you'll meet that day. You deserve to express hurt without fearing abandonment. You deserve stability that doesn't disappear after closeness. And if you've been silently enduring this dynamic, I want you to know something deeply important. Your desire for peace is not selfish, it is healthy. You are not asking for perfection, you are asking for safety. There is a difference. If your partner chooses healing, chooses self-awareness, chooses growth, this marriage can transform. Fearful avoidance is not a life sentence. With conscious work, patterns can change, nervous systems can rewire, trust can rebuild. But it requires both people walking toward safety, not one chasing while the other retreats. And if they do not choose healing, if they remain committed to avoidance, then you face a painful but empowering decision. Do you continue adapting to instability, or do you choose an environment that nurtures your nervous system? Choosing peace does not mean you failed. Choosing stability does not mean you didn't love enough. Choosing yourself does not mean you didn't try. Sometimes the bravest form of love is releasing the hope that someone will become who you need them to be and accepting who they are right now. If you are still in this marriage and still hoping, let that hope be grounded in action, not fantasy. Look at patterns, not promises. Look at consistency, not apologies spoken during fear. And if you feel yourself awakening, realizing you can no longer carry the emotional weight alone, honor that awareness. It's not betrayal, it's clarity. Marriage with an unhealed, fearful avoidant looks like intensity followed by distance. It looks like love tangled with fear. It looks like closeness that triggers panic. It looks like arguments that feel bigger than the issue. It looks like silence that lingers too long. But it does not have to define your future. Whether this becomes a story of mutual healing or a story of courageous separation, the most important thing is that you do not lose yourself in the process. Your peace matters. Your nervous system matters. Your emotional safety matters. And no matter what happens next, you are worthy of a love that feels steady, not chaotic, secure, not confusing, safe, not conditional. If this message resonates with your heart, let it be the beginning of awareness. Awareness leads to boundaries, boundaries lead to clarity, and clarity leads to freedom. Whether that freedom comes inside the marriage through healing or outside it through release. You are not alone in this, and you are not too much for wanting stability. You are simply human, longing for a love that feels like home.